Welcome to Unadulterated Adultery Confessions channel. We hope you will have fun with us. Enjoy watching. Everything changed the day Arthur, my husband's son, arrived at our house. What started as a simple family gesture turned into a story of desire, secrets, and choices I can never undo. Between forbidden glances, tensions impossible to ignore, and the unexpected intervention of Isabella, my husband's sister, my life took a turn. I never imagined. Hello, darling. I'm not sure how you found your way here, but I know you won't be leaving anytime soon. This story isn't like the others. It will make you feel, think, and desire more than you ever imagined. Get ready. Your emotions might just spiral out of control. My life seemed like a calm river, but everything changed the day Arthur called his father. My name is Tracy, a 55-year-old housewife in San Diego. I am married to William, a hard-working man who owns a private transportation company and spends more time away from home than with me. When William told me Arthur needed to stay with us for a while after his divorce, I agreed without much thought. After all, he was his son. What could go wrong? The day he arrived, I was caught off guard. I hadn't seen Arthur in years, and the boy I remembered was now a man in every sense of the word. Tall, self-assured, with a gaze that seemed to see right through me. "Thanks for having me, Tracy," he said, with a smile that stirred an unfamiliar restlessness inside me. I didn't know then that his arrival would mark a turning point in my life. Arthur wasted no time settling in his energy, filling every corner of the house, a strong yet subtle presence. That night during dinner, he spoke about his divorce with calmness that surprised me. It was as if the weight of the situation didn't affect him at all. As he spoke, I couldn't help but watch him, his gestures, his steady voice, the way his eyes met mine. Whenever he answered my questions, "You have a different air about you, Arthur," I said without thinking. He responded with a smile, "And you haven't changed at all. Tracy, you are just as elegant as ever." That phrase, seemingly innocent, left a mark on me. With William away, most of the time the dynamics at home shifted. The next morning, I decided to spend my time cleaning and rearranging some furniture. Arthur was in the kitchen making breakfast when I asked for his help. "Can you give me a hand with this cabinet? It's heavier than it looks." He agreed with a smile and came over immediately. As we pushed it together, our hands brushed a brief contact, but enough to make my heart race. When we finished, I noticed his gaze lingering on me, intense, as if trying to decipher something. "Thanks for your help," I said, trying to sound natural, but something inside me had changed that night. I had trouble sleeping. I could feel his presence in the room next door, and though I tried to ignore it, thoughts of him invaded my mind. I got up to get a glass of water, and as I passed through the hallway, I heard music coming from his room. The door was slightly ajar, and I could see him sitting on the bed. Writing in a notebook, he looked so focused, so detached from everything that I felt like an intruder for a moment, but I couldn't look away. There was something hypnotic about him, an energy that drew me in a way I didn't understand. I quickly walked away, but that image stayed with me. Days passed, yet the tension between us only grew stronger. One afternoon, as Arthur was working out in the backyard, I stepped outside with a glass of lemonade. He was shirtless, and the sweat traced every muscle of his body. When I offered him the glass, our eyes locked again. "Thank you, Tracy," he said, his voice carrying a tone that left me speechless. My cheeks flushed, and I hurried back into the house. But deep down I knew this wasn't just my imagination. Something was happening between us, something unspoken but impossible to ignore. That night, as I was cleaning the kitchen, Arthur walked in to pick something from the fridge. "Need any help?" he asked, stepping closer than necessary. "No need. I'm almost done," I replied, but he didn't move. I could feel his presence behind me, the warmth of his body so close it was hard to focus. When I finished, I turned to say something, but his eyes met mine, unwavering. "Tracy, I really appreciate everything you've done for me," he said softly. For a moment, time seemed to stop. But before I could respond, he stepped away with a smile. That night it became clear to me that the line between the permissible and the forbidden was about to be crossed. Do you feel it? The tension is just beginning, and what's coming next will change everything like this. If you are captivated by this tension, comment on what you think will happen next and subscribe now. I promise what's ahead will make you think and keep you on the edge of your seat. Later that afternoon, while I was cleaning the living room, Isabella Williams' sister called. I'm stopping by for a visit. It's been ages since we've had a good chat, she said excitedly. Her visits weren't unusual, but something about her tone made me feel this one would be different. By the time she arrived, Arthur was home. He opened the door just as Isabella was stepping inside Arthur. "You've grown so much I almost didn't recognize you," she exclaimed, pulling him into a hug that lingered a couple of seconds too long. He smiled, slightly uncomfortable yet as charming as ever. From that moment I sensed the atmosphere, shifting into something I couldn't quite place. After the greetings, we sat in the living room. Isabella always carried herself with confidence, but today she seemed particularly at ease as we talked. She directed comments at Arthur that seemed innocent enough but carried undertones I couldn't ignore. "It's incredible how much you've changed, Arthur. You must be driving the girls at your gym wild," she said, her gaze fixed on him. He chuckled modestly, shifting slightly in his seat, clearly both flattered and uneasy by her attention. I tried to steer the conversation elsewhere, but Isabella kept dropping subtle remarks that maintained the charged air in the room. Eventually, she suggested opening a bottle of wine. "It's been so long since we've had a proper family evening," she said, pouring the glasses, nervous but not wanting to seem out of place. I agreed, and Arthur accepted his glass with a smile. As we drank, the conversation turned more personal, more intimate. Isabella had a knack for steering topics into uncomfortable yet captivating territory. At one point, she turned to Arthur directly, asking, "How do you handle so much attention from your clients?" He laughed, attempting to deflect, but Isabella pressed on with that body. "I wouldn't be surprised if many of them want more than just your training advice." Arthur responded with a casual comment, but I noticed how his eyes darted toward mine as if gauging my reaction. Words began to mix with glances, and the room seemed to shrink around us. Isabella stood from the couch and moved to sit beside Arthur. "It's incredible how life changes people," she said, placing a hand on his shoulder. Arthur looked surprised but didn't pull away from the other side of the room. I tried to interject. "Isabella always so direct," I said with a nervous smile, but she wasn't about to stop. She turned to me and extended a hand. "Tracy, come here." I don't bite. I approached slowly, trying to keep my composure. Sitting down on Arthur's other side, I noticed his expression shift. He looked caught between us, confused, intrigued, and maybe even a little tempted. The air thickened, becoming intimate, almost suffocating. Isabella, with her usual confidence, began joking about how it had always been a team. "Tracy and I have always known how to share things. Haven't we?" Her words struck a chord deep within me, igniting something I'd been holding back for far too long. I didn't even realize when I gave in, but my body moved toward them on its own, my breathing quickening, my thoughts clouded by desire. I reached the couch, my heart pounding like a drum in my ears. Isabella smirked mischievously and leaned in to kiss Arthur, her lips soft but full of challenge. He returned the kiss, though his gaze kept flickering to me when I sat beside him. The brief touch of my hand on his was enough to make him turn to me. In that instant, the barriers between us shattered, our lips met with a wild intensity one had never known. It was primal, unrestrained, a release of everything we had been holding back. Arthur's hands roamed my body urgently while Isabella, with confidence, orchestrated each and every touch. The living room, a place of countless family gatherings, became a chaotic symphony of tangled bodies. Arthur's hands explored every inch of skin they found. My back arched as his lips grazed my neck, the sensation heightened by Isabella's touch, which added an unexpected layer of intensity to the moment. The rhythm was frenetic and raw, each movement driven by an urgency that felt unstoppable. Every sound escaping our lips was a silent confession, a testament to the fact that we were surrendering entirely to something forbidden, something irreversible. After that night, the atmosphere in the house shifted. Isabella quickly began showing signs of discomfort during breakfast. As we sipped our coffee, her words were carefully chosen, her gaze avoiding both mine and Arthur's. "I think I'll stay at a hotel next time I visit San Diego," she said, with a nervous laugh that barely concealed her unease. I simply nodded, trying to maintain my composure, but inside I knew she was grappling with something she couldn't handle. Arthur, on the other hand, seemed more at ease than ever. His confidence had only grown since that night. Later that afternoon, as I was organizing boxes in the garage, Isabella approached me. "Tracy, can we talk?" she asked, her tone serious, her face a mixture of conflicting emotions. "I don't know how that happened," she began. "It was intense, but I can't get it out of my head. This is wrong. Tracy, I can't keep coming here as if nothing happened." Isabella's words were a whirlwind of guilt and regret, yet laced with unresolved desire. I tried to calm her. "Isabella, what happened was out of the ordinary, but it doesn't have to define us. We can leave it behind." But even as I said those words, I knew they were hollow. Nothing about that night could be erased. While Isabella wrestled with her guilt, Arthur seemed resolute, determined to relive what had transpired. That evening after dinner, he found me in the kitchen washing dishes. "Tracy, can we talk?" he asked, stepping closer with a look I had come to recognize. I set aside what I was doing and followed him into the living room. "I can't stop thinking about you," he confessed, his words bold and unwavering. His honesty hit me like a thunderbolt. For a moment I stood in silence, searching for a response that wouldn't come Arthur. "This can't keep happening," I said, trying to sound firm. But with the confidence he had grown into, he stepped closer. "You know, this isn't just physical," he said, his voice steady. "I feel it every time we're near each other." His words made me falter again. The next day, Isabella decided to leave earlier than planned. "Thank you for everything, Tracy," she said, giving me a quick hug. Her eyes were full of emotion, but she didn't say anything more. Arthur saw her off with a smile, as if everything was perfectly fine, but I knew Isabella wouldn't be coming back anytime soon. Her departure left a void in the house, but it also brought a strange sense of relief. It felt as though her absence gave Arthur more freedom to approach me without the weight of her presence. That night, as I sat in the living room with a book, Arthur walked in and sat beside me. "Tracy, I know you're struggling with this, but I need you to hear me," he said, his tone more serious than usual. His sincerity was disarming. "I don't know how to explain it, but since I've been here, I feel something I've never felt before. I don't want this to end." His words were a mix of confession and plea. Still trying to hold myself together, I replied, "Arthur, this has to stop. William trusts us. This would ruin everything." Yet even as I spoke, I could feel my resolve crumbling. That same night, as I lay in bed trying to sleep, I heard footsteps in the hallway. The door to my room creaked open slowly, and there he was, Arthur, with a look that spoke more than words ever could. "I can't stop thinking about you," he whispered. I didn't respond. I stayed silent. Caught between desire and guilt, he took a step closer, then another, until he stood beside my bed. "Just tell me to leave and I will," he said, his voice soft but resolute, but those words never left my lips. Instead, I let him come closer, and in that moment I knew I had crossed the line once again. My body had made its decision long before my mind could catch up. I didn't stop him as he moved closer. I could feel his warmth even before he touched me, and when his hands cupped my face, the world ceased to exist. The first touch of his lips was a spark, igniting something uncontrollable within me. His mouth moved with a mix of urgency and tenderness, unraveling every defense. I surrendered my hands, instinctively seeking his body. Feeling the hard contours of his muscles, "William," my fingers Arthur didn't take long to let passion take the lead. His hands roamed, my skin sliding along my neck and down with a firm touch that sent shivers through me. When he lowered me onto the bed, the weight of his body pressed against mine, trapping me in a pleasure I didn't want to escape. His mouth explored every inch of my skin with a devotion that left me breathless. His hands were strong and deliberate, each caress setting me ablaze. I couldn't hold back the sounds escaping my lips as his rhythm grew hungrier and more intense. When our bodies finally became one, it was as if everything we had suppressed erupted at once. There was no room for hesitation, only the consuming desire that overtook us. My breath mingled with his, each movement drawing responses from me that I couldn't control in that moment. Nothing else existed. His body pressed against mine, his hands marking every inch of my skin, his whispers brushing against my ears. It was wild and freeing, a whirlwind. I didn't want to escape. What would you have done in my place? Subscribe, because this isn't the end, the inevitable has only just begun. A few days later, William returned from his trip, exhausted but in good spirits. His smile filled the house with that sense of calm that felt almost cruel. I couldn't look at him without feeling the weight in my C***T. He talked about work and the new contracts he was negotiating. All I could think about was what had happened in his absence. "Is Arthur settling in well?" he asked sincerely. I nodded, forcing myself to stay, composed Arthur sitting casually on the living room couch answered smoothly. "Yeah, everything's great, Dad, thanks for letting me stay here." His tone was so natural that for a moment I wondered if he was handling this secret far better than I was. "Has Isabella called since she left?" Weeks passed without a word until I received a message. "Tracy, I can't keep going like this. I've decided to move away for a while. I need to clear my head." I stared at the text, feeling a mix of relief and sadness. I knew her departure was an escape, but I also understood that she didn't have another choice. When I told William that Isabella had decided to move, he seemed surprised but didn't ask too many questions. "She's always been impulsive," he said, brushing the topic aside. Arthur, however, didn't say a word, but I noticed how his expression hardened briefly upon hearing the news. That night Arthur sought me out again, just as he had done so many times since it all began. "I'm looking for a place to move soon," Arthur said. As he sat next to me on the couch, his words caught me off guard. "Why so soon? I thought you'd stay a little longer," I replied, unable to hide the surprise in my voice. He looked at me with that intensity one could never ignore. "You know, I can't stay here, Tracy. This is getting too complicated and I don't want to make things harder for you." His honesty left me speechless for a moment. I wanted to beg him to stay, but I knew he was right. I knew his leaving was inevitable, but I wasn't ready to let him go. That night, when I heard the familiar footsteps in the hallway, I knew it would be the last time the door opened slowly, and there he was staring at me with an intensity that seemed to penetrate through me. His voice, deep and heavy with emotion, broke the silence. "This will be the last time," he said. I didn't respond. His words were a painful reminder that this moment was as inevitable as it was fleeting. He moved closer and I let him. His warmth enveloped me, and as his lips met mine, the weight of all the emotions I had suppressed over the weeks exploded between us. The kiss was more passionate than ever, as if we both knew every second mattered. His hands, firm and deliberate, explored my body, leaving no inch untouched, as if he were committing it all to memory. His breathing grew heavier as his body leaned over mine, lowering me onto the bed with a tenderness that contrasted with the urgency of his movements. My hands sought his, our fingers briefly intertwining before his caress resumed their path across my skin. His lips left mine, trailing down my neck and collarbone, leaving a blazing trail of heat and desire that made my back arch. Every touch, every movement was infused with a mix of passion and farewell, as if his body were saying everything his words couldn't. When we became one, the world around us disappeared. The rhythm was deep, a desperate dance that blended the intensity of desire with the sorrow of knowing. It was the last time. Every glance and every muffled moan was a silent promise that this moment would live within us long after it ended. When it was over, silence hung between us as if there was nothing left to say. The next morning, William left early for work, blissfully unaware of what had unfolded in his own home. As I saw him off, I felt trapped between three worlds, the one I shared with him and the secret one I had built with his son. Once William was gone, I sat in the living room trying to make sense of everything that had happened. Arthur came down the stairs with a suitcase in hand. "Time for me to go," he said, with a calmness that hurt more than I expected. I walked him to the door, and before leaving he turned to look at me one last time. "Thank you for everything, Tracy, and never forget it." The house felt larger and emptier. After Arthur left, William carried on with his routine, oblivious to everything, while I struggled to fill the void his son had left behind. Days dragged on, but every corner of the house reminded me of him. Even though I knew what we had done was dangerous, part of me couldn't help but miss him. Isabella didn't return either. It was as if they had both decided to erase this chapter from their lives, while I was left with the memories and the consequences of everything that had happened. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment if you enjoyed this story. This will help us create more engaging stories.